fascinating. It's in the news this week. Candace Owens did 2 episodes of her podcast where she covered odd things about 9/11. Her focus is more on the Israeli connection. The first episode was dedicated to the dancing Israelis. Have you guys ever heard of this conspiracy theory that 5 Israeli nationals with possible ties to Israeli intelligence were seen celebrating and photographing themselves while the Twin Towers were burning on 9/11 by a woman in an apartment in New Jersey?
It's not a theory. No, that's factual. They detained those guys. They were cheering and celebrating as the towers were on fire and coming down. No, that's a fact. There was 5 of them?
Yes, because the police held them they were detained by the FBI for 73 days, 71 days. But they were, so you're correct. The conspiracy isn't that they existed. It's their ties to the Israeli government, and the Israeli government's involved.
And they did have intelligence connection. Like, they were involved in the intelligence community from Israel.
Yes, there were ties. And then they worked for a company called the Urban Moving Company, which when they raided the office mysteriously.
It was ransacked.
Yes,
everything was empty.
Company, that's so vague.
Urban Moving Company.
Urban Moving, great name.
So they end up detaining these guys. They end up releasing them after 71 days of holding them, and they decided the guys didn't have any time.
Where'd they go back? To Israel?
Back to Israel.
Weird.
Then a few days later, Candace does a second episode, and it's dedicated to this messaging service. I'm going to butcher the name, as I'm going to do throughout this entire newscast. I apologize. There's an app called, it was an instant messaging service in the 2000s called Odigbo.
Perfect.
It was a messaging service that was created in Israel. And on that messaging service, there was a message sent out 2 hours before the 9/11 attacks, warning that there was going to be an immediate attack, predicting the events of 9/11 on the messaging service. So you have, if you look from what the evidence lays out that Candace Owens has presented, there's 5 dancing Israelis who were, if they didn't have foreknowledge of the attacks, were in the right place at the right time to celebrate it.
Yeah.
And then you have a weird message that warns people that there's going to be an attack on the World Trade Centers in 2 hours from now. And somehow there were over 4,000. According to reports, there were over 4,000 Israeli nationals that worked in the World Trade Centers, and only 4 of them died on 9/11.
Only 4?
Only 4. The rumors have always been that they were tipped off in advance.
Why don't you tell everyone?
That's a great question. I would.
Because no one died then.
No, what do you mean? You gotta have collateral damage. Oh, no. They needed at least, bro. If 200 people died, it would have been still tragic. We would have still done the mission. But when you say 3,000 Americans were murdered, terrorists, that sells a lot more. That sells, and it's crazy, Rob. I don't think about. Every time you hear people say October 7th was Israel's 9/11, you know what I say now? Oh, you mean all the prior knowledge and it led to a war, and that's the real comparison. Not
they
that
don't
it was
know how true that statement is.
They don't. Yeah, exactly. They don't realize how true the statement is when people go, "That was our 9/11." Exactly. Everybody, they knew it was Benjamin Netanyahu, knew it was coming. It happened, and guess what? It resulted in war. Go.
So whenever these things start to go viral, I always question, I'm like, is this a psyop? Like the Hawk Tuah girl that we talked about.
God.
Right? Well, okay, that's going everywhere. Why is that going everywhere?
Right.
What are they trying to distract us from? And then you see the Biden debate last night and that mess. You're like, maybe they're distracting from something else. And then started digging around 9/11 talk, and I realized this video was part of an unsealed treasure trove of information regarding the Saudi royal family and the Saudi government's involvement in 9/11 currently. There's a group of 9/11 victims' families, insurance companies, and others who are suing the Saudi government, claiming that they were either involved in the 9/11 attacks or financed the 9/11 attacks. This video was captured by a guy named Omar al-Bayoum. He is, and I'm butchering the last name, but he is an accused.
Omar al-Bayoumi.
Bayoumi?
Say it?
Al-Bayoumi.
Al-Bayoumi. He is a accused Saudi intelligence officer. He is tied to Saudi intelligence. They call him a Saudi intelligence operative.
Okay.
This video came out. If we could show this, we don't have to really play it much, but this is video that came out this week as part of the lawsuit against the Saudi government. This is footage of Omar al-Bayoumi casing Washington, D.C. in 1999 prior to the attacks. When he's filming this video, he is with 2 diplomats from the Saudi government, and he is in this video telling people he calls brothers who are planning an upcoming attack they're planning an upcoming plan that he is going to take more footage of the area for them.
Oh, shit. Yeah, why would you be doing that?
So
he's not sightseeing. He's going to all the major monuments and the buildings and the.
But who is this guy?
Also, what was with that? I don't know the name of this building yet, but I will report it to you soon. That's not how you report about your vacation.
Yeah, I'll report it.
I'm going to report back to you what beach I went to.
That's some suspect shit.
So who is this guy? I really dug it. I started to go down the rabbit hole, Vinny, because I'm like, this is super interesting.
Yeah.
Because this guy, Omar al-Bayoumi, he actually lived in Saudi Arabia until 1994, where he worked for the Saudi Ministry of Defense and Aviation.
That's normal.
Yeah, it sounds like a government position. Comes to the United States in 1994, moves to San Diego. When he moves to San Diego, he enrolls in the University of San Diego. But while he's working as a student at the University of San Diego, he is also being paid by the Saudi General Authority of Civil Aviation. They paid al-Bayoumi salary through a government contractor. However, in 1999, that government contract then comes up. And guess what? The Saudi government then responds to the contractor with a letter marked extremely urgent. This is 1999, the same year that footage was documented, where he says that the government of Saudi Arabia wanted al-Bayoumi's contract renewed as quickly as possible. Then there's a bunch of weird stuff that starts going on. A Saudi philanthropist donates $500,000 to a Kurdish mosque being built in San Diego, but the requirements are that al-Bayoumi must be the maintenance manager of the mosque with a private office with a phone and computer that cannot be monitored by the church. That's weird.
Holy shit.
Then, in late 1999, al-Bayoumi starts receiving money. Where does that money come from? The Saudi government. He ends up receiving money from Princess Haifa bint Fazl. She is the wife of Bandar bin Sultan, the Saudi ambassador to the United States, and this money starts flowing in. $2,000, $3,000 checks. He ends up receiving somewhere between $50,000 and $75,000 from the princess, who is married to the Saudi ambassador to the United States. Okay, so we can clearly see that this guy has ties to the Saudi government.
Yeah.
This is the interesting part.
Oh, wow.
On,
What's interesting?
No, on January 15th of 2000, two future 9/11 hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mindar. They flew from Bangkok, Thailand to Los Angeles, California. When they landed in Los Angeles, California, they had help from a person who helped them find an apartment, co-sign the lease in the apartment, finance them $1,500 to pay their rent, then help them obtain driver's license, rides to social security offices, and obtained information on flight schools. Do you guys have any idea who the person is that was helping the two 9/11 hijackers when they arrived in the United States?
Who?
Omar al-Bayoumi, the same guy that we just fucking talked about. The guy that's working with the Saudi government picks up the hijackers at LAX when they land. He gets them an apartment, he funds the apartment, he lives with them, helps them get all of the government documents they need to be able to go to flight school. Like, he literally took these guys to flight school. They live across the street from al-Bayoumi in their apartment after they get settled. They actually live with al-Bayoumi for a little bit before he can find them an apartment across the street from his. According to neighbors, they had no furniture. They constantly played flight simulator games into the middle of the night, and they frequently took limousine rides that would pick them up for very short meetings and return them.
Oh shit, there's no audio in there.
So all of this proves or leads back to the assumption, because not only the government starts to investigate al-Bayoumi, and there's all kinds of weird stuff. Out of the 19 hijackers on 9/11, 15 of them are Saudi nationals.
15.
They were from the Saudi, what is it? Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In addition to that, there's this thing called 28 pages. Have you guys ever heard of 28 pages?
I've heard it. No.
Okay, it's 28 pages that were redacted. They were declassified in 2017, but it's part of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. It's the last 28 pages of a report that they did in 2002 following the attacks that literally ties us all in a big bow, and they kept it from the American public. They released the rest of the report, but they kept these 28 pages secret for 16 years until it becomes public in 2017, which then initiates lawsuits on behalf of the 9/11 victims' families against the Saudi government. In that, they discover that this guy has phone records back to al-Bayoumi, the guy that brought the terrorists from LAX to the apartments and worked with them for 2 years leading up to the attacks. They actually trace this guy's phone records. His phone records actually are tied to Osama bin Laden. It was Osama bin Laden's spiritual advisor. He was also receiving money not only from the Saudi national government while helping these guys get their stuff. He was also receiving money from Osama bin Laden through this spiritual advisor, and those payments coordinated, as did phone calls, with specific moments when the 9/11 hijackers arrived in America, when they signed their first lease, when he helped them. So he was getting paid, and certain milestones, he would communicate with Osama bin Laden, and they would send him more money. So,
I mean, every day, I was an 11-year-old child, 12-year-old child. We were being told to stand for a moment of silence at 9:11 a.m. So picture little kids, 10, 11, 12, standing up for a moment of silence. And then over the speakerphone, they would tell us to think about and to remember the people that had died. Yeah, we were thinking about death every day at 9:11 a.m. A couple of years later, I entered high school, and my older sister's boyfriend made me watch a documentary. It was called Loose Change. I will never forget it. Never, ever forget it. I came out of watching that documentary, which I think if you looked it up today, it would say conspiracy theories about 9/11. But irrespective of how they want to categorize it, at the very least, you came out of it recognizing that not everything was told to the public about that day. Don't need to go too far, but there's no question that we were not told everything about that day, and that many questions were not being answered. I mean, some of the things that we were even told make entirely no sense. For example, we were told that the terrorist attacks were executed by the Saudis, remember? Which totally explains why we then decided to go to war with Iraq, who had weapons of mass destruction that were never found. And who can forget how the newscasters told the public that they were definitely sure that it was the Saudis? Don't remember? Let's revisit it. Let's go back to 2001 and watch this clip from our trusted news source, CNN. Take a listen.
Another development on Saturday, New York officials revealed at a news conference here in the city that a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site. You can believe that. No other details were given, but the discovery prompted the FBI and police to expand the search area down in Lower Manhattan.
I like how even the newscaster says, if you can believe that, because nope, I refuse to believe that. You should not either. You are telling me that somebody hijacked a plane, got onto the plane, crashed the plane exploded into fire, tower collapsed. They could not even find all of the human remains. But in all of this, in all of the fire, in the collapse of the building, in all the dust, in all the struggle, they found, and didn't give any details of how or who found it, the passport. The little paper passport survived everything. And they go, oh, well, look, this is one of the hijackers. This is one of the Saudi hijackers. He must have dropped his passport from the sky before he flew the plane into the building, and somehow they couldn't even find the audio boxes, the black boxes from the plane, but they have the passport. So here it is. Yeah, nope, not going for that. Then, of course, there are those who believe that 9/11 was an inside job, a false flag event, and those people are deemed the craziest because how dare they? How dare they question that narrative? How dare you think that your government could be involved in a false flag attack at all? Well, let me tell you something, sweetheart. You don't have to believe that 9/11 was an inside job, but you better tether yourself to the understanding that false flag events are a reality, not an imagination, not a conspiracy theory. It is a reality. And you want to know how we know that? Well, you can just look this up on Wikipedia if you don't believe me, because a former sitting president who was subsequently assassinated in the back of a car next to his wife, JFK, he refused to sign off on a false flag event. The CIA came to him. This is called Operation Northwoods. You should look this up if you think that I'm making this up. The CIA came to JFK and they said, we have an operation. We want to go to war with Cuba. Okay. And he said, we have some ideas of how we're going to get the American public on our side, how we're going to get public sentiment to shift so that they want war. And what we think we should do is stage a false flag event, pretend that Cuba is attacking America when in reality it's not. It's really us. One idea that they floated was a fabricated shoot down of a U.S. Air Force plane. They also floated blowing up a U.S. ship. And other ideas that they had were just to orchestrate a series of terror attacks on United States citizens. They thought maybe in Miami, maybe in D.C., we'll just start killing people and blaming the Cubans. And JFK said, this is maniacal. I absolutely will not sign off on a false flag event against American citizens in order to get them to agree for us to go to war with Cuba. So yeah, those things do actually happen in the world. And there were plenty of Americans who thought that it was, at the very least, incredibly suspicious during 9/11, shortly thereafter, when this segment ran also back in 2002 on ABC News as an update to a prior segment that they had done. Take a listen.
In the days after the September attacks, there were countless rumors about strange coincidences surrounding the events. One report about a group of Middle Eastern men spotted the morning of September 11th parked just across the river from New York City has not gone away. Investigation of their presence has led to questions about whether Israel was conducting espionage on U.S. soil. We're joined now by ABC's John Miller with an exclusive report this evening.
That's right, Elizabeth. This is a case that took the FBI and the CIA more than 2 months to sort out, while 5 Israelis waited in jail.
It began when this woman was watching the Twin Towers burning from her apartment in New Jersey. She noticed 3 men on top of a van, posing for pictures with the towers burning in the background.
And I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked at me. You know, they didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
The witness called police, who stopped the van hours later and arrested 5 men. All 5, it turns out, were Israeli. They were turned over to the FBI. Sources tell ABC News, during a check of national security databases, some of the men were listed as having had connections with Israeli intelligence. At the FBI, that set off alarm bells.
The FBI needed the answers to 3 important questions. Who were these men? What brought them to that parking lot on the morning of September 11th? And did they have any advance knowledge of what was going to happen that day?
The men said they were just taking pictures at the time. They said they worked for a company called Urban Moving. The FBI obtained a search warrant for the company's offices.
2 SUVs were filled up with between 9 and 12 boxes and computers.
Not long after the arrests, the offices of Urban Moving were simply abandoned. Almost everything was left behind. In jail, the 5 Israelis were repeatedly interrogated and given lie detector tests. Stephen Gordon was their American lawyer.
They were asked questions if they had ever been approached by or hired by any non-United States intelligence community.
While there is still some debate among American intelligence officials, many investigators believe some of the men were part of an Israeli operation aimed at monitoring radical Islamic charities that support groups like Hamas, something lawyers for the 5 men and the Israeli government strongly deny.
These 5 Israelis were not involved in any intelligence operation in the United States. The story is simply false.
In the end, the FBI concluded there was no evidence that any of the 5 men had advance knowledge of the September 11th plot. After 71 days, the 5 Israelis were deported, leaving some ruffled feathers among both U.S. and Israeli officials.
All right, guys, so nothing to see there. Obviously, you'd be a conspiracy theorist if you had any questions about that. You actually would be worse. You'd probably be anti-Semite if you had any questions about a foreign government overseas that had people who were attached to their intelligence apparatus who were celebrating and taking photos as the towers burned and American citizens were dying. Yeah, don't be any of those things. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about it first and foremost because America forever changed after 9/11. We, in my view, stopped being a free country. For fear, we gave up freedom. It's really difficult to imagine the world prior to 9/11. Imagine people that were just able to go to the airport, were not treated like they had done something wrong, didn't have to take their belts off and their shoes off and their quarters out of their pockets, and they just simply got on the plane. Yeah, we don't have it anymore. In fact, they collect even more information. Now they want to take your photo. We're all a suspect now. They essentially used our paralyzing fear and the media and the school system, stand up, the indoctrination, remember the people that died, to jam through the Patriot Act. We're also talking about this because they used that same fear to throw us into more endless wars in the Middle East. And if you remember those fear tactics as vividly as I do, then you might be looking around and recognizing a very familiar playbook. You're a terrorist sympathizer if you don't like bombs and war and dead people and, my gosh, the Muslims, they're bad. Yeah, no, I'm none of those things. What I am actually is an American, and I have questions. And while speech is still free in this country, I intend on asking them, because what could possibly be more American than that?
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now, Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has details in the first of a 4-part series.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. There is no indication that the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. The highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Fox News has learned that one group of Israelis, spotted in North Carolina recently, is suspected of keeping an apartment in California to spy on a group of Arabs who the United States is also investigating for links to terrorism. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units. Another part of the investigation has resulted in the detention and arrests of dozens of Israelis at American mall kiosks, where they've been selling toys called Puzzle Car and Zoomcopter. Investigators suspect a front. Shortly after the New York Times and Washington Post reported the Israeli detentions last month, the carts began vanishing. Zoomcopter's webpage says, we are aware of the situation caused by thousands of mall carts being closed at the last minute. This in no way reflects the quality of the toy or its saleability. The problem lies in the operator's business policies. Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally. A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, the Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target. The document concludes, quote, Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives. A spokesman for the the Israeli embassy here in Washington issued a categorical denial, saying any suggestion that Israelis are spying in or on the U.S. is, quote, simply not true. There are other things to consider, and in the days ahead, we will take a look at the U.S. phone system and law enforcement's methods for wiretaps, and an investigation into the possibility that both have been compromised by our friends and allies overseas. Brett?
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected. None of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett.
Yeah, this is going to the fact that they were spying on some Arabs, right?
Correct.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. We reported on the approximately 60 Israelis who had been detained in connection with the September 11th terrorism investigation. Carl Cameron reported that U.S. investigators suspect that some of these Israelis were spying on Arabs in this country, and they have turned up information on the planned terrorist attacks back in September that was not passed on. Tonight, in the second of 4 reports on spying by Israelis in the U.S., we learned about an Israeli-based private communications company for whom a half dozen of those 60 detained suspects worked. American investigators fear information generated by this firm may have fallen into the wrong hands and had the effect of impeding the September 11th terror inquiry. Here's Carl Cameron's second report.
Fox News has learned that some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone. How? By obtaining and analyzing data that's generated every time someone in the U.S. makes a phone call.
What's it going to say, please?
Here's how the system works. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the phone companies by Amdocs Limited, an Israeli-based private telecommunications company. Amdocs has contracts with the 25 biggest phone companies in America and more worldwide. The White House and other secure government phone lines are protected, but it is virtually impossible to make a call on normal phones without generating an Amdocs record of it. In recent years, the FBI and other government agencies have investigated Amdocs more than once. The firm has repeatedly and adamantly denied any security breaches or wrongdoing. But sources tell Fox News that in 1999, the super-secret National Security Agency, headquartered in Northern Maryland, issued what's called a top-secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information report, TSSCI, warning that records of calls in the United States were getting into foreign hands. In Israel in particular. Investigators do not believe calls are being listened to, but the data about who's calling whom and when is plenty valuable in itself. An internal Amdocs memo to senior company executives suggests just how Amdocs generated call records could be used. Quote, widespread data mining techniques and algorithms, combining both the properties of the customer, like credit rating, and properties of the specific behavior such as whom the customers are calling. The Amdocs memo says the system should be used to prevent phone fraud, but U.S. counterintelligence analysts say it could also be used to spy through the phone system. Fox News has learned that the NSA has held numerous classified conferences to warn the FBI and CIA how Amdocs records could be used. At one NSA briefing, a diagram by the Argonne National Lab was used to show that if the phone records are not secure, major security breaches are possible. Another briefing document said, quote, it has become increasingly apparent that systems and networks are vulnerable. Such crimes always involve unauthorized persons or persons who exceed their authorization, acting on exploitable vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities are growing because, according to another briefing, the U.S. relies too much on foreign companies like Amdocs for high-tech equipment and software. Quote, many factors have led to increased dependence on code developed overseas. We buy rather than train or develop solutions. U.S. intelligence does not believe the Israeli government is involved in a misuse of Amdocs information, and Amdocs insists that its data is secure. What U.S. government officials are worried about, however, is the possibility that Amdocs data could get into the wrong hands, particularly organized crime, and that would not be the first time that such a thing has happened. Fox News has documents of a 1997 drug trafficking case in Los Angeles in which telephone information, the types that Amdocs collects, was used to, quote, completely compromise the communications of the FBI, the Secret Service, the DEA, and the LAPD, and we'll have that and a lot more in the days ahead, Brett.
Carl, I want to take you back to your report last night on those 60 people who were Israelis who were detained in the anti-terror investigation, and the suspicion that some investigators have that they may have picked up information on the 9/11 attacks ahead of time, not passed it on. There was a report, you'll recall, that the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, did indeed send representatives to the U.S. to warn, just before 9/11, that a major terrorist attack was imminent. Why does that leave room for the lack of a warning?
Well, I remember the report, Brett. We did it first internationally right here on your show on the 14th. What investigators are saying is that warning from the Mossad was non-specific and general, and they believe that it may have had something to do with the desire to protect what are called sources and methods in the intelligence community. The suspicion being perhaps those sources and methods were taking place right here in the United States. The question came up in the Select Intelligence Committee on Capitol Hill today. They intend to look into what we reported last night, and specifically that possibility, Brett.
So, in other words, the problem wasn't the lack of a warning, the problem was lack of useful details.
Quantity of information.
All right, Carl, thanks very much. Coming up next, Israeli-based company called Amdocs that generates the computerized records and billing data for nearly every phone call made in America. As Carl Cameron reported, U.S. investigators digging into the 9/11 terrorist attacks fear that suspects may have been tipped off to what they were doing by information leaking out of Amdocs. In tonight's report, we learned that the concern about phone security extends to another company founded in Israel that provides the technology that the U.S. government uses for electronic eavesdropping. Here is Carl Cameron's third report.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Here's how wiretapping works in the U.S. Every time you make a call, it passes through the nation's elaborate network of switchers and routers run by the phone companies. Custom computers and software made by companies like Comverse are tied into that network to intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls, and at the same time transmit them to investigators. The manufacturers have continuing access to the computers so they can service them and keep them free of glitches. This process was authorized by the 1994 Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, or CALEA. Senior government officials have now told Fox News that while CALEA made wiretapping easier, it has led to a system that is seriously vulnerable to compromise and may have undermined the whole wiretapping system. Indeed, Fox News has learned that Attorney General John Ashcroft and FBI Director Robert Mueller were both warned October 18th in a hand-delivered letter from 15 local, state, and federal law enforcement officials who complained that, quote, law enforcement's current electronic surveillance capabilities are less effective today than they were at the time CALEA was enacted. Converse insists the equipment it installs is secure, but the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Converse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Converse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Converse is considered career suicide. And sources say that while various FBI inquiries into Converse have been conducted over the years, they've been halted before the actual equipment has ever been thoroughly tested for leaks. A 1999 FCC document indicates several government agencies expressed deep concerns that too many unauthorized, non-law enforcement personnel can access the wiretap system. And the FBI's own nondescript office in Chantilly, Virginia, that actually oversees the CALEA wiretapping program, is among the most agitated about the threat. But there is a bitter turf war internally at FBI. It is the FBI's office in Quantico, Virginia that has jurisdiction over awarding contracts and buying intercept equipment. And for years, they've thrown much of the business to Converse. A handful of former U.S. law enforcement officials involved in awarding Converse government contracts over the years now work for the company. Numerous sources say some of those individuals were asked to leave government service under what knowledgeable sources call troublesome circumstances that remain under administrative review within the Justice Department. And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett?
Carl, is there any reason to suspect in this instance that the Israeli government is involved?
No, there's not, but there are growing instincts and an awful lot of law enforcement officials in a variety of agencies who suspect that it had begun compiling evidence and a highly classified investigation into precisely that possibility. Brett?
All right, Carl, thanks very much.
On the long-standing government espionage investigation, federal officials this year have arrested or detained nearly 200 Israeli citizens suspected of belonging to a, quote, organized intelligence-gathering operation. The Bush administration has deported most of those arrested after September 11th, although some are in custody under the new anti-terrorism law. Cameron also described an investigation into the possibility that an Israeli firm generated billing data that could be used for intelligence purposes and described concerns that the federal government's own wiretapping system may be vulnerable. Tonight, in part 4 of the series, we'll learn about the improbable roots of the probe, a drug case that went bad 4 years ago in L.A.
Los Angeles, 1997. A major local, state, and federal drug investigation sours. The suspects? Israeli organized crime, with operations in New York, Miami, Las Vegas, Canada, Israel, and Egypt. The allegations? Cocaine and ecstasy trafficking and sophisticated white-collar credit card and computer fraud. The problem? According to classified law enforcement documents obtained by Fox News, the bad guys had the cops' beepers, cell phones, even home phones under surveillance. Some who did get caught admitted to having hundreds of numbers and using them to avoid arrest. Quote, this compromised law enforcement communications between LAPD detectives and other assigned law enforcement officers working various aspects of the case. The organization discovered communications between Organized Crime Intelligence Division detectives, the FBI, and the Secret Service. Shock spread from the DEA to the FBI in Washington and then the CIA. An investigation of the problem, according to law enforcement documents, concluded, quote, the organization has apparent extensive access to database systems to identify pertinent personal and biographical information. When investigators tried to find out where the information might have come from, they looked at Amdocs, a publicly traded firm based in Israel. Amdocs generates billing data for virtually every call in America, and they do credit checks. The company denies any leaks, but investigators still fear that the firm's data is getting into the wrong hands. When investigators checked their own wiretapping system for leaks, they grew concerned about potential vulnerabilities in the computers that intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls. A main contractor is Converse Infosys, which works closely with the Israeli government and under a special grant program is reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by Israel's Ministry of Industry and Trade. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report. I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they're being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they're in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Beyond the 60 apprehended or detained and many deported since September 11th, another group of 140 Israeli individuals have been arrested and detained in this year in what government documents describe as, quote, an organized intelligence gathering operation designed to, quote, penetrate government facilities. Most of those individuals said they had served in the Israeli military, which is compulsory there, but they also had, most of them, intelligence expertise and either worked for Amdocs or other companies in Israel that specialize in wiretapping. Earlier this week, the Israeli embassy here in Washington denied any spying against or in the United States. Tony?
Carl, we've heard the comments from Ari Fleischer and Colin Powell. What are officials saying behind the scenes?
Well, there's real pandemonium described at both the FBI, the DEA, and the INS. A lot of these problems have been well known to some investigators, many of whom have contributed to the reporting on this story. And what they say is happening is supervisors and management are now going back and collecting much of the information because there's tremendous pressure from top levels of all of those agencies to find out exactly what's going on. At the DEA and the FBI already, a variety of administrative reviews are underway, in addition to the investigation of the phenomenon. They want to find out how it is that all this has come out, as well as be very careful because of the explosive nature and very political ramifications of the story itself. Tony?
All right, Carl, thanks.